Ethan Carter had always thought of himself as a patient person. He was known at work for staying calm under pressure, and his friends often joked that he could solve any problem without breaking a sweat. But nothing, not even the toughest bug, in a software project or the longest meeting with demanding clients, had prepared him for the news he received on a chilly Tuesday afternoon. It started with a phone call from his sister-in-law, Rachel. She sounded excited when she spoke, her voice high-pitched and fast. "Ethan, you won't believe this," she said. "Your mom just gave birth to twins." For a moment, Ethan thought he had misheard her. Surely Rachel was joking, or maybe it was some kind of prank. After all, his mother, Margaret Carter, or Maggie as everyone called her, was 70 years old, 70. That wasn't an age where people had babies anymore. It was the age where people retired, took cruises, and spent time with their grandchildren. "Rachel, stop messing around," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone light. "What are you really calling about?" "I'm serious," Rachel insisted. "She gave birth yesterday. 2 boys. They're adorable." Ethan froze, the phone pressed tightly against his ear. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. Was this some sort of medical miracle? Had his mother adopted the babies? None of it made sense. All he could think about was how impossible it seemed. When he finally hung up, Ethan felt like the world had tilted slightly off its axis. He sat down heavily on his office chair, staring blankly at his computer screen. For the rest of the day, he couldn't focus on anything. Every email, every line of code, every conversation with a colleague seemed distant and irrelevant. His thoughts kept circling back to one question. Why would she do something so ridiculous? By the time he got home that evening, Ethan's frustration had turned into full-blown anger. Claire, his wife, greeted him at the door with a sympathetic, "Look." She had already heard the news from Rachel. "Are you okay?" Claire asked softly, placing a hand on his arm. "No, I'm not okay," Ethan snapped, pulling away. "This is insane. She's 70 years old. What was she thinking?" Claire sighed, knowing better than to argue with him when he was this upset. Instead, she followed him into the kitchen, watching silently as he paced back and forth. "It's not normal, Claire," Ethan continued, his voice rising. "People don't have kids at that age. It's selfish, irresponsible. What does she expect us to do? Raise them for her when she can't handle it anymore?" Claire hesitated before responding. "Maybe there's more to it than we know. Have you talked to her yet?" "No, I haven't talked to her," Ethan shot back. "And I don't want to. Not until I figure out what's going on." The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling no less angry. In fact, if anything, his frustration had grown overnight. By the time he arrived at his mother's house later that afternoon, he was ready for a fight. Maggie opened the door before he could knock, her face lighting up with a smile. She looked tired but happy, wearing a loose sweater and jeans. In her arms, she cradled 2 tiny bundles swaddled in blue blankets. "Ethan," she exclaimed, stepping aside to let him in. "I'm so glad you're here. Come meet your brothers." Ethan didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, glaring at her. "Brothers?" he repeated bitterly. "You're 70 years old, Mom. You shouldn't be having kids at all, let alone twins. What were you thinking?" Maggie's smile faltered, but she didn't back down. "I know it's unusual," she said calmly. "But sometimes life takes unexpected turns. These boys are a blessing, Ethan. I hope you'll come to see that." "A blessing?" Ethan echoed incredulously. "How is this a blessing? You're too old for this. What happens when they need someone to take care of them? Who's going to step in when you can't keep up?" Maggie's expression hardened. "Don't assume you know what I'm capable of," she said firmly. "I've thought long and hard about this decision. Trust me, I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think I could handle it." Ethan shook his head, his fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't about whether you can handle it," he said. "It's about common sense. It's about responsibility. Did you ever stop to think about how this would affect the rest of us? About how embarrassing this is for me?" The words came out harsher than he intended, but he didn't care. He wanted her to understand how unreasonable this whole situation was. To his surprise, Maggie didn't yell or cry. She simply looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I'm sorry if this makes you uncomfortable," she said, quietly. "But these boys are my children, my responsibility. If you can't accept that, then maybe it's best if we don't see each other for a while." Her words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. For a moment he felt a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly drowned out by his anger. "Fine," he spat. "If that's how you feel, then fine. Don't expect me to stick around." With that, he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. As he drove home, his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that cutting ties with his mother was the only way to protect himself and his dignity from whatever chaos she had created. But deep down, buried beneath layers of anger and frustration, a small part of him wondered if he was making a mistake. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan threw himself into work like never before. Every morning he left the house before sunrise and returned late at night, exhausted but relieved to avoid any meaningful conversation with Claire. Work had always been his refuge, a place where problems were logical and solvable, but now it felt more like an escape. He buried himself in coding tasks, debugging sessions, and endless meetings, hoping that staying busy would dull the ache he felt deep inside. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of his mother holding those two tiny babies. It haunted him during quiet moments, creeping into his thoughts when he least expected it. At first, he told himself it was just anger. Anger at her for making such a reckless decision. Anger at himself for letting it get to him. But as time went on, he began to realize there was something else beneath the surface, something he didn't want to admit. One evening, after another long day at the office, Ethan came home to find Claire sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "How was your day?" she asked casually. "Fine," Ethan muttered, dropping his bag by the door. "Just fine." Claire nodded, but she didn't say anything else right away. Instead, she hesitated, biting her lip as though debating whether or not to speak. Finally, she put her phone down and turned to face him. "You've been avoiding talking about your mom," she said gently. "I know you're upset, but shutting everyone out isn't going to help." Ethan stiffened. "I'm not shutting anyone out," he replied defensively. "I just need some space to process everything." "Space is one thing," Claire countered. "But you've barely mentioned her since that fight. You won't even look at pictures of the twins. Don't you think that's a little extreme?" Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. Deep down, he knew Claire was right. He had been avoiding anything that reminded him of his mother and the twins. He hadn't checked social media in weeks, skipped family calls from Rachel, and avoided driving past Maggie's neighborhood altogether. Yet, despite his efforts, they still found ways to creep into his mind. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan wandered into his home office and flipped on the light. The room was cluttered with papers, notebooks, and old photos he hadn't touched in years. On impulse, he pulled out a dusty photo album from the bottom shelf and flipped it open. The first page showed a picture of him as a toddler, grinning wildly while sitting on Maggie's lap. Her hair was darker then, her face younger, but her smile was the same warm, loving expression he remembered from childhood. As he flipped through the pages, memories flooded back. Birthday parties, school plays, vacations. Each photo captured a moment of happiness, a reminder of the bond they once shared. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to feel something other than anger. Sadness washed over him, followed quickly by guilt. Had he been too harsh with her? Maggie had, always been kind, supportive, and selfless. She had raised him alone after his father passed away when he was 10. She worked multiple jobs to give him a better life, sacrificing her own comfort without complaint. How could someone who had done so much for him suddenly become someone he resented? The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling restless. He decided to take a walk to clear his head, wandering aimlessly through the streets until he found himself standing outside a small cafe. Inside, he spotted Rachel sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. Seeing her stirred up conflicting emotions, he wanted to ask about Maggie and the twins, but he also dreaded hearing their names. Before he could change his mind, he walked in and joined her at the table. "Hey," Rachel said, looking up in surprise. What are you doing here? I don't know, Ethan admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. I guess I just needed to get out of the house. Rachel studied him for a moment before nodding. You look tired. I haven't been sleeping well, Ethan confessed. And I've been thinking about Mom. Rachel's expression softened. She misses you, you know. She hasn't said much, but I can tell. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. I messed up, didn't I? Rachel shrugged. Maybe, but she understands why you're upset. She knows this whole situation is unusual. Unusual. That was one way to describe it. Ethan chuckled bitterly. Unusual doesn't even begin to cover it. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their drinks. Eventually, Rachel pulled out her phone and showed him a few recent photos of the twins. They were adorable, just like any other babies. Tiny fingers curled into fists, chubby cheeks, wide, eyes full of wonder. Despite himself, Ethan felt a twinge of curiosity. What were their names again? Jacob and Noah. They looked so innocent, completely unaware of the drama surrounding their arrival. They're growing fast, Rachel said with a smile. Mom's doing great with them, by the way. She's got a lot of energy for someone her age. Ethan frowned. How is that possible? I mean, 70 is... Well, it's old. Rachel hesitated, glancing around the cafe before lowering her voice. There's something you should know, she said cautiously. Something Mom didn't want me to tell anyone. Ethan leaned forward, his heart pounding. What is it? She's different, Rachel explained. Ever since the twins were born, she's been acting younger. Like, really younger. She's got more stamina, her skin looks smoother, and she barely gets tired anymore. It's weird, but amazing. Ethan stared at her, unsure whether to believe what he was hearing. Are you serious? As a heart attack, Rachel replied. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like she's been given a second chance at life. And she says it's all connected to the twins. The idea sounded absurd, almost sci-fi-like. Yet, as Ethan thought about it, he realized it wasn't entirely impossible. Science had made incredible advancements in recent years. Why couldn't something like this happen? Still, the revelation only added to his confusion. If Maggie truly was experiencing some kind of miraculous transformation, what did that mean? For the twins? For their family? For him? By the time he left the cafe, Ethan's mind was spinning with questions. He wanted answers, but he wasn't sure where to start looking. All he knew was that he couldn't keep running away from the truth, not if it meant losing his mother forever. It was the letter that changed everything. One ordinary afternoon, as Ethan sorted through the mail, an envelope caught his eye. It was plain white with no return address, but his name was written neatly in bold letters. Curious, he opened it and found a single sheet of paper inside. The message was brief. Regarding Margaret Carter's estate planning, please visit her residence to review relevant documents. Ethan stared at the letter, his stomach tightening. Estate planning? His mother wasn't sick, or at least he didn't think she was. Why would she need to prepare legal documents now? And why send him a formal notice instead of just calling him? For days, Ethan wrestled with whether or not to go. Part of him wanted to ignore the letter completely, to continue pretending that his mother and the twins didn't exist. But another part, the part that had been nagging at him ever since Rachel's cryptic comments, was desperate for answers. Finally, unable to resist his curiosity any longer, he drove to Maggie's house one Saturday morning. The house looked different from the last time he'd seen it. The front yard was tidier than usual, with freshly planted flowers lining the walkway. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender, and soft music played in the background. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too perfect. Yet, beneath the surface, Ethan sensed something unusual, an undercurrent of mystery he couldn't quite place. Maggie greeted him warmly when she opened the door, though her smile faltered slightly when she saw the uncertainty in his eyes. I wasn't sure you'd come, she admitted, stepping aside to let him in. I wasn't sure I would either, Ethan replied honestly. What's this about? The letter said something about estate planning. Maggie nodded, leading him to the living room. There are things I need to show you, she said quietly. Things you deserve to know. Her tone sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He followed her upstairs to the attic, a space he hadn't visited since he was a child. The room was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and faded photographs. In the corner, however, stood a sleek metal door that looked completely out of place among the vintage items. This is where I've kept my secrets, Maggie explained, unlocking the door with a key she pulled from her pocket. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. Inside the hidden room, Ethan felt like he had stepped into another world. Strange devices lined the shelves. Some looked like medical equipment, while others resembled props from a science fiction movie. There were jars filled with glowing liquids, stacks of journals, and blueprints covered in technical drawings and equations. At the center of the room sat a large desk, its surface littered with papers and folders marked with labels like Project Genesis and Genetic Enhancement Protocols. What is all this? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maggie sighed deeply, pulling out a chair and gesturing for him to sit. Years ago, I volunteered for an experimental procedure, she began. It was supposed to reverse aging and improve human health. At first, it worked perfectly. I felt stronger, healthier, more alive than I had in decades. But then, complications arose. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The treatment altered my DNA in ways we didn't fully understand. My body started producing cells that were younger, faster, more resilient. But there was a catch. I couldn't pass these changes on naturally. To preserve the genetic advancements, I had to carry children later in life. Ethan listened in stunned silence, struggling to process what she was saying. So, the twins aren't just regular babies? No, Maggie confirmed. They're part of something much bigger. Their genes hold the key to humanity's future, to surviving diseases, environmental disasters, maybe even extending lifespans indefinitely. That's why I had them, Ethan. Not because I wanted more children, but because the world needs them. The weight of her words hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. For so long he had judged her, condemned her for decisions he didn't understand. Now, faced with the truth, he felt ashamed of his anger and ignorance. But why keep this a secret? He asked. Why not tell me from the start? Because I was afraid, Maggie admitted. Afraid of how you'd react. Afraid of what might happen if the wrong people found out about the project. This kind of technology, it could change the world for the better, but it could also be used for harm. I couldn't risk exposing you or the twins to danger. Ethan looked around the room again, taking in the bizarre collection of gadgets and documents. Despite the strangeness of it all, he couldn't deny the brilliance behind the work. The blueprints showed intricate designs for machines he couldn't begin to comprehend, and the journals contained detailed notes on genetics, biology, and advanced science. It was clear that his mother had been involved in something extraordinary. The initial shock wore off, Ethan's mind began racing with questions. What exactly had his mother signed up for? Who else knew about Project Genesis? And most importantly, what did this mean for Jacob and Noah? They're safe, aren't they? He asked suddenly, turning back to Maggie. The twins. I mean, no one's after them, right? For now, yes, Maggie replied. But I can't guarantee their safety forever. That's why I need your help, Ethan. If anything happens to me, you'll have to protect them. You'll have to make sure the truth stays hidden until the time is right. Ethan swallowed hard, the enormity of her request sinking in. Protecting the twins meant stepping into a role he wasn't sure he was ready for. It meant facing unknown dangers and making sacrifices he couldn't yet imagine. But looking into his mother's eyes, he saw the same determination and love that had always defined her. And for the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. I'll help you, whatever it takes. Maggie smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea how much that means to me. Leaving the attic that day, Ethan felt like a new person. The anger and resentment that had consumed him for so long were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. He didn't fully understand everything about Project Genesis, or what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His family needed him. And this time, he wasn't going to let them down. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's life changed in ways he never could have imagined. He spent hours in the hidden room with Maggie, learning everything he could about Project Genesis. At first, the science behind it seemed overwhelming. Terms like genetic resequencing and cellular regeneration went over his head, but Maggie patiently explained each concept, breaking it down into simpler terms. Slowly, Ethan began to understand the magnitude of what his mother had done, and why it mattered so much. The twins, Jacob and Noah, became the center of their efforts. Every day, Maggie monitored their health using advanced equipment from the lab. She showed Ethan how to use devices that tracked their heart rates, brain activity, and even subtle changes in their DNA. It was clear that the boys were not ordinary infants. They were thriving in ways no normal child ever could. Their immune systems were stronger, their reflexes sharper, and their growth faster than average. "They're perfect," Maggie said one evening as she adjusted a sensor on Noah's wrist. "But we can't let anyone find out about them. Not yet." Ethan nodded, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Protecting the twins meant keeping them hidden from the outside world, and from people who might want to exploit their unique genetics. Maggie had already faced threats before. She told Ethan about shadowy organizations and rival scientists who had tried to steal her research in the past. Now, with the twins as living proof of Project Genesis, the stakes were higher than ever. Despite the danger, Ethan found himself growing closer to his younger brothers. Watching them sleep, play, and giggle brought back memories of his own childhood. For the first time in years, he felt connected to his family, not just to Maggie, but to something bigger than himself. He started helping Maggie with their care, feeding them bottles, changing diapers, and singing lullabies to soothe them when they cried. It wasn't easy balancing this new role with his job, but Ethan didn't mind. These moments made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, while Maggie rested upstairs, Ethan decided to explore the lab further. He wandered through the shelves, examining the gadgets and notebooks scattered around the room. One particular journal caught his eye, a worn, leather-bound book filled with Maggie's handwriting. Curious, he flipped it open and began reading. The entries detailed her journey with Project Genesis, from the early days of volunteering, for the experiment to the challenges she faced raising the twins. Some pages were filled with technical notes and diagrams, while others contained personal reflections. One passage stood out. "I never wanted this life for myself, but I knew it was necessary. If humanity is to survive, we must evolve. My sacrifice is small compared to the potential rewards. Yet I fear for my children. Will they see me as a hero or a monster? All I can do is hope they'll forgive me." Ethan closed the journal, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Until now, he had only seen Project Genesis as a scientific breakthrough, a marvel of modern technology. But reading Maggie's words reminded him of the human cost, the loneliness, the fear, the sacrifices she had endured. Suddenly, her actions made sense in a way they never had before. Later that evening, Ethan confronted Maggie about the journal. They sat together in the living room, the twins sleeping soundly in their cribs nearby. "You've been carrying all of this alone for so long," Ethan said softly. "Why didn't you ask for help sooner?" Maggie smiled sadly. "Because I didn't want to burden anyone. This project, it's dangerous. People will stop at nothing to get their hands on it. I couldn't risk involving you or anyone else." "But you shouldn't have to face it alone," Ethan insisted. "You're my mom. You raised me. Let me be here for you now." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes, and for a moment she looked younger than Ethan had ever seen her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've waited so long to hear those words." As the days passed, Ethan threw himself into protecting the twins and supporting Maggie. Together, they developed routines to keep the babies safe. They installed security cameras around the house, encrypted files containing sensitive information, and practiced emergency protocols in case someone discovered their secret. Claire, sensing the change in Ethan, offered her support as well, helping with household chores and offering emotional encouragement, but peace didn't last long. One night, as Ethan worked late in the lab, he noticed something odd on one of the monitors. The screen displayed footage from the front yard camera, showing a dark figure lurking near the edge of the property. At first, Ethan thought it might be a stray animal, but then the figure moved closer, revealing a man in a hoodie holding some kind of device. Panic surged through Ethan. He quickly grabbed his phone and called Maggie. "Someone's outside," he whispered urgently. "What should we do?" Maggie remained calm, her years of experience kicking in. "Stay quiet and lock the lab door," she instructed. "I'll handle this." Ethan did as she said, his heart pounding as he watched the intruder approach the house. Moments later, he heard Maggie's voice coming from the intercom system. "Leave now, or I'll call the police," she warned, her tone firm and authoritative. The man hesitated, glancing around nervously before retreating into the shadows. Ethan exhaled in relief, though his nerves were still on edge. When Maggie joined him in the lab a few minutes later, her expression was grim. "This isn't over," she said. "They'll come back. We need to be ready." For the rest of the night, Ethan and Maggie worked tirelessly to reinforce their defenses. They updated passwords, added extra layers of encryption to the data, and reviewed escape routes in case of an emergency. By morning, they were exhausted but prepared. As Ethan lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, he realized how much his perspective had shifted. What had once seemed impossible and frightening now felt like a mission worth fighting for. His anger toward Maggie had vanished, replaced by admiration and love. She wasn't just his mother anymore. She was a pioneer, a protector, and a hero. And he was determined to stand by her side no matter what came next. The days following the break-in were filled with unease. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made him jump. He started sleeping less, spending most nights patrolling the house or reviewing security footage. Maggie, too, seemed more cautious, rarely leaving the twins' side. Despite their precautions, the threat of another attack loomed large over them. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table going over emergency plans with Maggie, Claire walked in. She had been quiet about the situation so far, respecting Ethan's decision to keep her at arm's length. But now, seeing the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders, she decided it was time to speak up. "You're wearing yourself out," Claire said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You can't keep doing this alone." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't have a choice. If something happens to the twins or to Mom, I'll never forgive myself." Claire hesitated before responding. "Maybe you don't have to do it alone. Let me help. I know I'm not part of all this Project Genesis stuff, but I can still support you. You need someone to share the load." For a moment, Ethan considered refusing. He had always tried to shield Claire from the chaos in his life, especially after cutting ties with Maggie. But looking into her concerned eyes, he realized how unfair that was. Claire had stood by him through everything, his anger, his guilt, his mistakes. She deserved to be included, even if it meant putting her at risk. "Okay," Ethan said finally. "But you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't just about protecting the twins. It's about keeping secrets that could change the world. People will stop at nothing to get their hands on this." Claire nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I'm ready." With Claire's help, the household became more organized. They divided tasks between them. Claire handled daily chores and kept the twins entertained during the day, while Ethan focused on fortifying the house and monitoring potential threats. Maggie, meanwhile, continued her research, searching for ways to make Project Genesis safer and less detectable. Despite their efforts, the danger grew closer. One night, as Ethan reviewed footage from the security cameras, he noticed something alarming. Several vans had parked a few blocks away, their occupants dressed in black tactical gear. Using binoculars, Ethan spotted one of them holding a device similar to the one Maggie used to scan the property. a clear sign they were after the twins. "We need to move," Ethan said urgently, rushing to Maggie's room. "They're on to us." Maggie didn't argue. She quickly gathered essential documents and equipment, packing them into a duffel bag. Together, the four of them loaded the twins into the car and drove off into the night, leaving behind the only home Ethan had ever known. Their first stop was a remote cabin owned by a trusted friend of Maggie's. Tucked deep in the woods, it offered temporary safety, but everyone knew it wouldn't last forever. While Maggie worked tirelessly to secure the twins' genetic data, Ethan scoured the internet for information about their pursuers. He discovered references to a shadowy organization known as the Vanguard, which specialized in acquiring advanced technologies for profit and power. "They won't stop until they have the twins," Maggie said grimly when Ethan shared his findings. "We need to stay one step ahead of them." Over the next few weeks, the family lived like nomads, moving from place to place to avoid detection. Each relocation was stressful, but it also brought them closer together. Ethan marveled at how resilient Maggie remained, despite the constant fear and uncertainty. She taught him how to use the scanning device, identify safe locations, and encrypt sensitive files. Under her guidance, he began to feel more confident in his ability to protect the twins. One afternoon, while hiding in a small motel, Ethan found himself watching Jacob and Noah play on the floor. Their laughter filled the room, momentarily drowning out the weight of their predicament. For the first time since learning about Project Genesis, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future where they weren't running anymore, a future where the twins could grow up freely, without fear. "I want them to have normal lives," Ethan said aloud, catching Maggie's attention. She smiled sadly. "So do I. But we can't give up hope. Someday, the world will be ready for them." That night, Ethan lay awake thinking about Maggie's words. Hope, that was what kept them going even in the darkest moments. It wasn't just about survival. It was about believing in a better tomorrow. And for the first time, Ethan felt truly proud to be part of something bigger than himself. As dawn broke, Ethan made a silent promise to his brothers. No matter what happened, he would fight for their future with everything he had. After months of running and hiding, Ethan finally began to see light at the end of the tunnel. With Maggie's guidance, they had managed to stay one step ahead of the Vanguard, thwarting their attempts to track them down. Each narrow escape brought the family closer together, strengthening their bond and resolve. Slowly but surely, Ethan transformed from a reluctant participant into a devoted protector of his brothers and of humanity's future. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Ethan stood in the backyard of a new safe house. It was a modest home surrounded by tall trees and rolling hills, far removed from prying eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to relax. The twins, Jacob and Noah, were giggling as they played with rattles and stuffed animals on a blanket spread across the grass. Their laughter was infectious, filling the air with a sense of joy that Ethan hadn't experienced in years. Maggie joined him a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. She handed one to Ethan and sat beside him, watching the Yao twins with a contented smile. "They're growing so fast," she said softly. "It feels like just yesterday they were born." Ethan nodded, sipping his coffee. "Do you think we'll ever be able to stop running? To give them a real home?" Maggie hesitated before answering. "I don't know, but I do believe there's hope. Every day we survive, every challenge we overcome, it brings us closer to finding a solution. Maybe someday, the world will be ready for Project Genesis." Ethan looked at her, seeing the same determination in her eyes that had inspired him since childhood. "We'll make it happen," he said firmly. "Together." Their conversation was interrupted by Claire stepping outside, holding a tray of breakfast. She set it down on a small table and joined them, sitting cross-legged on the grass. "I've been thinking," she began, glancing at Ethan. "What if we start reaching out to people who might help us? Not everyone out there is part of the Vanguard. There are scientists, activists, even governments who could support your mom's work, if we can trust them." Ethan frowned thoughtfully. It's risky. If word gets out too soon, we could put the twins in even more danger. But if we wait too long, Maggie interjected, we risk losing control of the project entirely. Claire's right. We need allies. People who understand the importance of what we're doing. Over the next few weeks, the family carefully crafted a plan. They identified potential contacts, trusted experts in genetics, medicine, and ethics, who might be willing to hear them out. Using encrypted communication channels, Maggie reached out to these individuals, sharing limited details about Project Genesis while emphasizing its potential benefits for humanity. To their surprise, several responded positively, eager to learn more. The turning point came when a renowned geneticist named Dr. Helen Meyer agreed to meet with them. Known for her groundbreaking research in human evolution, Dr. Meyer had long advocated for ethical advancements in science. After reviewing Maggie's data and meeting the twins, she expressed cautious optimism. "This is extraordinary, Dr. Meyer said during their meeting. But it's also dangerous. If this technology falls into the wrong hands, it could lead to unimaginable consequences. We need to protect it, and your family, at all costs." With Dr. Meyer's support, the group formed a coalition of like-minded individuals dedicated to safeguarding Project Genesis. They worked tirelessly to secure funding, develop countermeasures against the vanguard, and raise awareness about the ethical implications of genetic enhancement. Slowly, they built a network strong enough to shield the twins from harm. As the months passed, life began to settle into a routine. The constant fear of pursuit faded, replaced by a sense of purpose and hope. Ethan took on the role of guardian, ensuring the twins' safety while learning everything he could about their unique biology. Maggie continued her research, refining the techniques used in Project Genesis to ensure its long-term sustainability, and Claire became the glue that held the family together, offering unwavering support and love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found himself sitting alone on the porch, reflecting on how far they had come. From anger and resentment to acceptance and unity, his journey had been anything but easy. Yet looking back, he realized that every challenge had brought him closer to understanding what truly mattered: family. Maggie joined him a few minutes later, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You've grown so much," she said warmly. "I'm proud of you, Ethan." He smiled, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you. You taught me what it means to fight for something bigger than myself." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky. Inside, the sound of Jacob and Noah's laughter echoed through the house, a reminder of the future they were building together. Ethan knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would still be threats, challenges, and sacrifices to face. But for now, in this moment, everything felt right. He had found redemption, not just with his mother, but within himself. And as he gazed at the twinkling stars above, he allowed himself to dream of a brighter tomorrow. A tomorrow where Jacob and Noah could grow up free from fear. A tomorrow where humanity could evolve, guided by compassion and wisdom. A tomorrow made possible by the unbreakable bond of a family determined to change the world.